Okay, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be in the world, or after the fact, watching this historically. Today is Thursday, October 25th, 2018. This is Kubernetes SIG Architecture, and I am your co-chair, Jay Singer-Dumars, and I work at Google. And we're going to get started. The agenda, should you want to follow along after the fact or now, is at bit.ly/sig-architecture. We've got a full agenda today, and we'll have to keep to our time boxes or we won't make it through. So I will be fairly ruthless in my cat herding today, as per normal. And also, let's see. If somebody could be the note taker, that would be great. It's really hard for me to moderate and also take notes. So anybody, please jump in. You should have edit rights to the document, and that would be extremely helpful. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the first item, which I'm guessing belongs to Aaron, and it's the conformance test PRs that need attention.
Sure. I don't think I have a lot to talk about here this week. I suppose I can share my screen just to show us the PRs that we're talking about. Give me a second. Screen sharing is disabled. It's no big deal. So basically, there's a PR ready for review in the in review column on the conformance board. I can poke Brian or Clayton about that later today. There's also an issue I'd like comment on. We mentioned this briefly last week where there's a daemon set test that just straight up doesn't make sense unless there are multiple nodes in the cluster. It's marked as conformance right now, but it also skips unless there is more than one node in the cluster. And we kind of have this thing where we don't want conformance tests to skip for any reason. So the question is, do we add some kind of tag like multi-node or feature multi-node or whatever to decide whether or not we should keep this in, kick this out, so on and so forth? I don't think we need to talk about that here, but I would like discussion from folks who have opinions on that issue. The other thing I want to call out is there's a PR about exposing a TTY option for probes. This has been flagged with a kind API change. It raised my eyebrows because it involves adding a field to a V1 API. I won't go into the details of that because I haven't looked too much, but it's raising my eyebrow. I don't know if anybody here has looked at that, but I would really like you to take a look at that because conformance tests do involve the liveness probes, readiness probes, and so on and so forth. So that should be looked at. There was discussion last week about mixed OS clusters or what it would take for Windows containers to go GA. That is not something I really have the time to actively shepherd. I feel like this group decided that we needed a group of people to go off and gather the requirements of the differences across operating systems. I don't know if anybody has actually taken an action item for that. And this didn't come up because we ended up canceling the conformance working group meeting yesterday due to lack of agenda. So I don't know if this is the forum, if that other group is the forum, but just raising that if somebody cares deeply about Windows containers going to GA and that being considered part of a certified conformant Kubernetes cluster, they should take ownership of this and drive it forward. We talked at length about this last week, so I won't go further into it.
Do we, briefly, do we want to try and have somebody from our SIG go attend the SIG Windows session and just see what is happening there? Because in the past, I was attending regularly, and they're super open and helpful. So it might be good for us to be a little bit proactive and go talk to them and let them know sort of what that.
I've also been talking with Patrick about this.
Okay.
I think that basically, and this actually goes back to the daemon set question too, the question to wrestle with is how much we want to try and solve the profiles for conformance issue or not, right? That's going to be a really thorny thing to solve. And we're going to have to at some point, and it's just a question of whether this is the one that pushes us across or we try and take a strategy where that's not necessary.
Yeah.
It's just like anything else. And so right now my strategy is to say, hey, let's try and push for conformance on hybrid clusters, where by conformant we mean as much of the tests as we can, we run on Windows, and the rest of them we run on Linux. And we only say that for now, we're GAing with the notion of a hybrid cluster as opposed to a Windows-only cluster, because I don't want to be in the position of watering down the conformance tests by turning things off if it's a Windows-only cluster. And then I think ultimately the right solution is to have the profiles discussion and, have the various profiles. But I feel like if we have that discussion, it's going to take us 6 months.
Okay. Joe, you had your hand up.
So I think we should just rip the Band-Aid off and have the profiles discussion. And I think we can say that there's a single node profile and there's a Windows profile, and we just start there. I mean, that doesn't seem like that's that hard.
That's fine with me. I mean, in all honesty, that's fine with me. This is the proclivity for us to bike shed, right?
Yeah, but I think, we can start small with something where we have real concrete needs about. I am worried, and I think this is something that bears discussion around this idea of a hybrid cluster, right? The fact that some stuff works on a cluster on some nodes, but not across all nodes is, I think, going to be confusing to users. So I think it might be worthwhile to sort of clarify that with respect to conformance.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. Brian has ended up, I want to acknowledge that we're straying into a totally tangential area right now in some ways. And this bears much more discussion than we can cram in the next 2 minutes. So can we table this and put it in the meeting next week? Is that okay?
I would welcome somebody writing a short sort of like, here's what profiles are, boom, let's get it done and see if we can just sort of all agree on that. Like having a straw person to work against would be great.
There is actually a document, Joe, about what profiles are, and actually the proposal was that profiles be strictly additive. So there would need to be a base profile that worked everywhere. That can be brought up again. It was presented previously, at least in the conformance working group. It's been at least discussed in SIG Architecture, but we can dig up that doc and reshare it. But that's the basic concept: is that there would be, it would be additive. The original proposal was both additive and subtractive, and that was found to be confusing.
Yeah, I think it would be great to see this stuff put into a KEP, have this body actually go through and say thumbs up, and then just like make it be a done deal.
Well,
somebody's got to actually do that and key it up, and then we can review it here.
As a precursor to that, we wanted to go characterize tests that we thought would get potentially kicked to some profile. For example, tests that only work on single nodes or multi-nodes, or have particular OSs or restricted privileges and things like that. That work has not been done. So it's sort of hard to know how much impact there will be if we strip down the base profile at this point.
Yeah, do we want to, something I think
we actually have done that and have that list, so I'll get that list. We have, at least from the Windows perspective, we have that list.
Oh, that would be great.
So I'll get Patrick to put that onto the issue.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brendan. That's super helpful. This is something too, we'll get into this in a second in terms of the SIG charter review, but this is a classic example of there's probably decisions to be made here, and right now that decision belongs or is in an owner's file that characterizes what tests are in or out for the conformance suite. Should we be starting with the approval layer and working backwards so that we understand what actually is feasible and not? Is that how are we going to handle decision making on this?
I don't understand the issue.
At some point, we'll decide, yay, profiles. How does that actually get implemented? Who approves that decision? Who is a person in an owner's file somewhere that says, now we're writing profiles, and that's okay.
I think this is squarely on SIG Architecture to actually define what conformance is, and I think that means what the profiles are, what's in and out of the profils.
I was just wondering what sub-project.
So we can make it a sub-project of SIG Architecture. In some ways, it intersects with getting the charter done, but I would say it's some type of thing related to this group.
Well, that's segue to the next topic, but Matt has
Matt.
I was just going to say, SIG Architecture owns what is conformant Kubernetes, if I remember right?
Yes. No, and I'm not saying that we don't. I was just saying that someone has to make a decision somewhere, and that means that there should be a sub-project.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. We probably need to just have a sub-project with documented owners and the scope of what they have, so at least that our process and everything is documented, and it's not a bunch of us who show up who have differing opinions and the people of the week.
There's already an owner's file for the conformance test. So,
and there's a document which may not have been merged yet. Aaron was working on it.
Yeah, it got merged. It only took us 2 months to come to agreement on that. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, so this discussion was time boxed, which is a good segue to the next topic, which is the charter. So we had started on a charter a few months ago, and we took a step back from that to have a discussion about what we think the sub-projects of the SIG should be, the most critical sub-projects, of which conformance is one of the proposed sub-projects. Earlier feedback was that there were too many sub-projects, so with some discussion, we consolidated them. Also, discussions about how we can make the SIG more effective. And I saw there was some discussion on the mailing list while I was out. Really what we are lacking, obviously, from probably from these discussions about, well, we were supposed to do this, but that work has not been done, is that we are lacking in people working on the sub-projects to make progress. So in particular, conformance, Aaron has been doing a bunch of work recently, and Tim St. Clair had been doing some work, but really we need to have a group of people who are kind of dedicated to moving it forward. And then as we evolve the documented set of criteria and the documented process, we can promote those people who are actually doing the work to be approvers, and we can also onboard more reviewers if we have enough people to do that. And I would like to do that for the other similar projects as well. Like KEP has been a project for some time, and Jace probably knows the state of that better than I do, but features was moved to enhancements. There's work underway to move the KEPs to that repo. We're talking about deprecating the legacy proposals process and just fully moving the KEP. But we need people actually working on the process itself to move it over the finish line. The other two proposed sub-projects, so that's just 4 sub-projects, 4 main sub-projects. The other 2 are API and architectural governance. We have a set of API approvers, which has been active for some time. And again, we can, as more people, if we can find more people to help with API reviews, we can promote them to reviewers and approvers through the normal process of the project. And then code organization. That's something where we've discussed for a long time, but we haven't had too many people actively working on it. And there's one topic related to that as an agenda item today, but including things like vendoring, multiple repos, feature branches, staging, and so on. Figuring out what direction we should move with respect to our code organization overall, and making that happen. That is definitely an area. I would include generated code in that, by the way. That's definitely an area where we need a more concerted effort by people interested in moving that forward. That's probably the most understaffed of all the sub-projects at the moment. So those are the 4 proposed sub-projects, and I suggest with respect to the charter, we actually just start with focusing on the sub-projects and the basic minimal charter. This is a group that needs to address cross-cutting issues across the project and actually needs to get stuff done. So once we feel those sub-projects are moving along well, then we can potentially expand to other activities. But I would propose we at least start with those critical sub-projects.
One thing that has occurred to me is if you're looking for people to work on those sub-projects, you're competing with like people who can work on that can also run or lead or TL or chair or whatever other SIGs. Right. So there's a limited pool of people that can like, I'm thinking just of like the code organization one. There's only so many people that can have meaningful contributions to that.
I don't buy that.
I think there's a lot of people who can do the cat wrangling work. Like Aaron and I can easily pull double duty on that aspect. I think what's a problem is we need to make sure that we have a clearly defined set of execution items that we can solicit the community from to make sure that they can be unblocked to be able to execute freely, and also get those parties who seem to talk a lot about this topic to actually be able to commit to resourcing some of the execution items around them.
Yeah, Joe, you had your hand up for a second?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm trying to find a way to actually free up more of my time so that I can do things like double down on the KEPs, because I view getting that stuff is a force multiplier for everything else that we're doing. And I think there are folks in the community that can help, you know, cut through some of the indecision on this stuff and actually get stuff done. And you know, and I think, you know, that's kind of what we need here. And I think I'm hoping that once we get some of these processes in place, we can actually enable more people to step up in more ways. I've been disappointed in my own ability to devote time to this.
Yeah, I 100% agree. This is something I've just, as I've seen these things roll out over and over again, that having a documented process with things like mentorship and advancement to reviewer or approver, having those per each sub-project is hugely valuable, and it gives people an idea about what the bar is to succeed and to move forward. I also feel like sub-project owners need to be more like project managers sometimes and really staff out these things as opposed to being the person that does all the work. So, you know, the release team, classic example, the release lead used to do all the work. That was the release czar, and it became the release team that was led by that person, and it's much more effective. So I would love to see these sub-projects run more like that with roles that get staffed, and those staff, you know, those roles can change over time and evolve. But we definitely cannot be relying on individual heroics on this, or we're going to fail.
Yeah, so I think with respect to cutting through indecision, I don't think we're paralyzed by indecision on at least 3 out of 4 of the sub-projects, the API governance, conformance, and KEP. I think there are very concrete things that could be done to push those over the finish line. We could post some roles to the role board to say, look, we're looking for people to help drive these things and or help do some of the lifting. You know, I think some of this is basic project management and or software engineering kind of work that lots of people could potentially do. The code organization, there has been some indecision about that. We're waiting on to see how merging back in the feature branch goes on that specific issue. You know, there are other areas which could make progress if they have people working on them, like eliminating generated code, publishing code out to other repos, changing how we do vendoring and such.
I think code organization also can make a lot of progress. Maybe not all of the progress, but it can make a lot of progress if we're willing to spend time doing it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think some of the indecision that I'm thinking about is, I think broadly, I think we're all agreed on what we want these things to be, but the devil's in the details. And I think a lot of this stuff gets caught up with, you know, wordsmithing, you know, process documents and, you know, that type of stuff. And I think that is a disease that we suffer from.
Well, kept it anyway.
Yeah. For things like code organization, I would rather let somebody freewheel for a little while and come back and say what they think is actually going to be worthwhile and workable, rather than try to wordsmith an exact proposal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely one of those things where creating the proposal is like 85% of the work of actually doing it.
And whatever we create without doing it will be wrong anyway.
So I want to do a time check. So those are the 4 main proposed sub-projects. Right now, the sub-projects listed in SIG.YAML are a bit of a grab bag of stuff that no other SIG wanted. But I think these are the actual important things that we need to make progress on for this SIG right now. And like I said, we can potentially expand to other things later if we actually do feel that these are in good shape. But this seems like a good core body of work. So the other issue that kind of came up in the charter discussion, or one of the other main things that I think needs to get resolved, is another chair. You know, obviously the main issue we have with the chairs right now is that with only 2, if I go on vacation and something happens to Jace or vice versa, then we're kind of left without people to drive the meeting. So what I would love to see is someone actually step up and help with some of the organizational work of the SIG, and like many other roles on the project, you know, people who are already doing the work and are doing a good job, we're more than happy to just anoint them to be a chair. So if someone does actually want to help, we'd be more than happy. I did some agenda wrangling this morning and went and looked through the tracking boards and looked through open issues tagged API change or open PRs tagged API change and things like that. Next week, I want to do a review of what's going into 113 with the enhancement spreadsheet and the issues flag and the enhancements repo and some of the open PRs and such. But that's the kind of wrangling that definitely other folks can help with, and I'd be happy to walk somebody through if they're interested in that.
So so Matt's saying that let's get people doing that work and then we'll see who can do it. Cause like, I want to sign myself up for that, but I need to create space. So I'm not going to sign myself up.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I want to do. I want someone to step up, and I'm happy to walk them through with Jace about what's actually needs to get done. And once they're doing it, I'm more than happy to give away those Legos.
Yeah, so I'm happy right now to get involved in terms of like, so that we don't cancel meetings when we keep things moving. I'm post KubeCon, I'm going to have more time and more freedom to do this stuff. But if other folks want to get involved too, I'm not going to try and lick a cookie here that I can't eat.
Well,
I do think it would be good though to actually have, maybe if it's not chairs, we have deputies, people who can actually sort of step up and step in the case where, there's something is getting dropped. That might be a sort of half measure here.
Yeah, it also doesn't need to be the same person every week. If it's not going to be a chair, just some other participant, we can say, hey, there's nothing on the agenda. Does someone want to step up and try to populate the agenda? We could be more proactive about announcing that. I do check the agenda a day or two ahead of time if I'm around. And shockingly, I did actually take some time off recently. But for folks who are interested in SIG Architecture, I would like to see more discussion on the mailing list. We have a couple of issues that got put in the agenda today that I would like to punt to the mailing list, just as an example. So we could start, pre-announcing agendas via the mailing list if we could get the agenda in place more than 24 hours ahead of time. And that would surface, potential meeting cancellations and gaps and things like that.
I think another thing that we could look for chairs to do, and I think this is something that, again, like just getting in the right habits around this, is that as we punt stuff to the mailing list, we time box stuff in a meeting, but in the mailing list, these things can go on forever. So having some way to essentially start to cull these things down, drive to resolution, so that we don't have these sort of 100 message threads that have no resolution. Because there is no time box on the mailing list.
That's a fair point. I mean, certainly for specific questions, we can try to make a goal of time boxing for a week or something like that. Like if it doesn't get resolved on the mailing list, then it gets added to the meeting agenda. Could have some policy like that. I think some of the two things that I recommended punting to the mailing list seem like very specific technical issues that should be resolvable.
Would it make sense to move things to an issue or something in the repo once they've gotten enough discussion that they can be signed off on or something like that? Or
in the architecture tracking?
Yeah, in architecture tracking. Something that we can at least codify the decision, or because mailing lists are ephemeral.
I think some of this is boiling down these sort of amorphous questions into concrete things that can be answered or proposals that can be approved, and starting to move it from sort of we're talking about everything to we're actually talking about this. That's the thing that we need to, I think, in my mind, get better at.
Yeah. We're at time for this. There was one more thing that was what do members do and what authority they have. We really don't have time for this if we're going to hit the other things on the list.
My main suggestion for that is that we defer that question. If we think in terms of the Sub-projects, there are clear roles for participants, reviewers, approvers, and owners of the sub-projects. So as we move folks up the ladder, if we can actually, like I said, get people to actually help do the work, then it will be really clear what their status and authority and responsibilities are. Members at large, I think for the people who attend this meeting, if we can get the API review process going, and that's under the API governance sub-project, then we can get a broader set of input from folks across multiple SIGs in the project. But other than in their formal like reviewer, approver roles through the KEP process or through the API review process, I think it would just be considered input, more or less. And I think people have been mostly pretty good about responding to input from various people on the project. As per the mailing list discussion, we do need to get better at actually coming to a decision, though, and that's one thing I was hoping KEP would help us do, is make it clear who could actually approve the KEP so we can make a decision. Because in the past, with the proposal process, discussion went on, and the work, people just gave up on their proposal. They went and wrote the code, and it got merged, and the proposal just languished.
So can I subvert this topic for just a second to,
Yeah.
I added today, an agenda item, which was to re-propose that we spend time in this group every week or every other week to scan KEPs. It might be that the useful thing to do is to spend, say, 10 minutes a week scanning the current KEPs from this week and making sure that we agree with assignees and reviewers.
Can we, is there any possibility to get to a process where we look at things and we say, nice proposal, I don't think holistically looking at the project, we should take this right now, or is that out of scope? Is that our SIG decision?
I think that's a fine place to get, but like, do you track all the KEPs? I don't track all the KEPs. And
because there's too many.
Yeah,
I think there's too many language.
We have a KEP tracking board for this purpose.
Okay.
And we need more automation to keep it up to date, but Jace went through and tried to find all the KEPs that were in progress and put them in the board.
That thing's out of date now. It's like, this is one of those things, not a job a single human can do. It's impossible.
Well, we need to build automation to do it.
It's so painful. Oh my gosh.
Well, I think some of it's automation, but some of it's authority. Look, if somebody can say, hey, this KEP seems like it's not a cross-cutting KEP, do this. Or this KEP, I'm going to throw it back to you, like, make sure that so-and-so is ready to sign off on it. I mean, like I feel like if we have an editor that feels like they can really drive this, we can make this more efficient. But I think there's a certain amount of, like, everybody's kind of like tiptoeing around on stuff.
Well, I was just, with respect to automation, I was just saying surfacing what all the KEPs are. Is the thing that would benefit from automation. Even if all the KEPs move to their own repo, there's still some KEPs are in flight in PR, some KEPs are merged, but in a provisional state. It's just hard to know which KEPs are actually moving.
Does editor mean person who pulls all the KEPs once a week and updates their status, or does editor mean person who looks through all the KEPs and decides which ones require action at a meeting?
So I would actually like to punt this topic to next week, because next week I do want to look through over all of the proposed 1.13 features, and I also wanted to see if that matched the KEPs and the API reviews that were in progress. So that's already in the agenda. It's grayed out because people are getting confused by populating the agenda for next week so early. But that's in the agenda for next week already.
Yeah. I mean, just real quick, Eric, the way that I see it is that the KEPs can be essentially, are going to have are going to essentially be the agenda for this group in terms of things that we're going to want to look at, that we're going to want to surface, and that folks are going to focus on reading. And we need somebody to curate and manage that list, because that's essentially, in some ways, managing the agenda of this group.
All right, moving along, Matt. So in the agenda, we had asked basically to make sure that if we're going to discuss this, that we have the right parties present to have this discussion. Do we have the right people in the room to have this discussion?
I think we do.
Okay.
Yeah,
so it's all yours.
Yeah, so this was basically, was it last week? We were talking about Go packages and external use. I think it was Tim who said, said that, our packages really in Kubernetes shouldn't be used externally, even if the Go API is designed to be that way. And with our minor changes, we're always breaking Go API compatibility, which doesn't work with where Go modules is going. And I can't remember who else said it, said, as we move these things out, we're going to be the consumers of our own stuff. So if we're always breaking things, it won't just be the community that's experiencing these pain points. We'll be experiencing these same pain points because we'll be users of this stuff. And so rather than continue that conversation last week, it was more of a, okay, how do we go about doing things with our Go packages so that they can be externally used, and externally used may end up being us as we pull them back in. And so I just put this on here just to move it out of last week's conversation and to make sure it was continued on.
Yeah, it's a great example of a topic for the code organization efforts. Yeah, so I wasn't here last week, so I don't know what the discussion was. But I think we do.
I think we need to do something here. Like, Matt, are you proposing something, or are you proposing to be the proposer, or?
I only proposed to be the person to make sure it got carried from last week to this week. I did not sign up for more. You're not going to catch me on that. But what should we do as a next step, I guess, is the question that I would ask, because I don't want it to drop again, because this has come up more than once. And as long as we've got next steps to continue to carry this, and maybe people signed up to do them, we can at least take it the next step. So if we've got 15 minutes here for a time box, what should we discuss, and what next step should we figure we need to do?
Should we rename package to internal?
Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad idea. Yeah, actually, that would be a great idea. I think we should accept that there's not going to be a instant answer here. We've got a lot of code, and as we make it more accessible, we can't break the existing internal usages of it either. So this isn't the sort of thing where you can flip a switch and it'll all be better.
Wait, so you had an old proposal about where the steps beyond staging.
Yeah.
And that seems very relevant to this, because what we have been doing is moving code to staging that we want to copy out into other repos to be consumed in other repos, but we're still directly using the things from staging within Kubernetes.
Yeah, so that proposal didn't go anywhere because basically because people didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. People saw that we'd have all these repos, and if you wanted to get anything done, you'd have to make a change in a repo and then vendor it back into the main repo.
Right.
And like there was concerns about testing, like, will this other thing work with this thing? So I think those are legitimate concerns. I don't think they're unsolvable, but there's this sort of thing where everybody's going to have to work together to solve them. One possible solution is much better interface tests in the subrepos.
Unit tests.
You always catch things before you commit them, and you don't catch bugs when you vendor it back into the main repository.
So there are some other Go projects that have bots that automatically sync up-to-date versions of things and run tests.
Yeah, so that was my take in that document initially, is like we should just have a bot that, like, there's a file and the bot like automatically vendors and assembles. I still think that's probably doable, but it didn't catch on. The idea didn't catch on for whatever reason. Maybe it's time to go back and try again to get that document. I'll tell you what I'm trying now. As we're writing code for apply, I've got a new repository allocated where basically the business logic is going.
This is the structured merge diff.
Structured merge and diff, yeah. And that one, I put up a bunch of text in the releasing.md about we're going to follow Go compatibility rules and like the new Go module system. So that's an experiment. I hope it works out. If it does, then maybe we can replicate that in other places.
And there was a question in the email thread about how that relates to the feature branch, or there was a statement that they thought the feature branch was abandoned in favor of that.
No, the feature branch, we still got a whole bunch of bits inside. Sorry, I must have missed that. We're still twiddling a bunch of bits, and we're changing APIs and doing all sorts of stuff. So the feature branch is still necessary, but the business logic doesn't need to go in the main repo because it's pretty separable.
Okay, Dims has his hand up.
Yeah, a couple of things. So the bot proposed updates for external repositories will be immensely useful, even for the things that we have vendored already. So we can start there, get the automation working, and then we'll be able to turn it on for the repositories, that we break out of staging also. So it's going to be the same thing. You look at an external repository, merge it, run the tests, and then propose a patch. So it's going to be the same process for whether it is a vendored repository or things that we break out of staging, right? So that was one part. The other part is, right now, this question also leads to the next agenda on the item on the topic, where if we have things stuck in staging perpetually, we won't be able to re-vendor things back that depend on things in staging. So that's going to limit the number of things that we can do, especially in the external cloud provider stuff. So
I disagree. I think the cloud provider stuff just needs to be a long, hard slog of extracting things. And I think if everything is properly extracted, there shouldn't be a need for a vendor cycle.
The problem, Daniel, is that we have to support the V1 API. For example, Cinder API has to be supported. And if we break everything apart into staging repositories and then put that code and write another code in another repository that depends on the staging repository, we still need to find a way to support the V1 Cinder API. And for that, we would have to re-vendor some bits of it back into the KK repository. And that's where the problem is.
Maybe we can take this offline, and I'm happy to sync up directly with you in a
that's the next item on the agenda.
Yeah.
So there are links to the pull requests that are
right. Right. So there is, I don't see a way out other than having a cycle or having a completely external thing that Saad has proposed. Saad and other people have proposed. I put a link to that too. So, but the problem with the other one that is on the other proposal for the external controller that delegates to CSI is that it's going to take a really long time. And I don't know who's going to be able to do the work. And, I don't know how long it's going to take. So that seems to be the problem there. But anyway, I'm derailing the current item, so we can go back to what we were talking about.
One of those pull requests has details about what the circular dependencies are?
Yeah, that's on the, so it's pull request 69529.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's the one that re-vendors stuff. So you can take a look at that. But yeah, this is the same problem we have. So what Matt has proposed here is like, okay, we need to get to the point where we need to break things out of stage. We put things into staging, but then we need to break them out too. And we need to find a way to, or put a timetable on things saying, okay, we need to get these repositories ready for, next release and the one after that. And
I don't know.
Otherwise, we're going to be stuck forever in the external cloud provider stuff.
I don't know what you mean by break things out of staging in this context.
We had originally talked about steps after staging to make the external repos the actual authoritative home and then vendor stuff back in and delete it from staging.
Yes, but I don't think we reached consensus on that because there were at least a few notable voices who said, no, let's not do that.
Yeah, we never reached consensus on that, which is why we've remained in this state. But I guess maybe I need to go look at that PR more carefully. I didn't understand why it's not sufficient to rely on the external, because we publish everything in staging to external places. So.
Right. So there is one more
the issue is that the code that currently supports the Cinder API lives in tree. And so while we are straddling the divide of having it available to run externally, but unless we on a release boundary say, you know what, Cinder isn't supported in tree anymore. If you want to support it, you have to run this external controller, external provider. On that boundary, you still need the logic in tree, and we're trying to enable running it independently.
Yeah, it's not Cinder, just Cinder either, Jordan. For the EBS volumes or whatever, it's going to be
right.
The same
that was the
problem
example
as
in
well,
that.
right? Yeah. So all the ones that have in-tree volume providers are going to have this problem. Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, if we're talking about staging and we want to deal with something that's the hard, complicated bits, which is where we're probably getting hung up on, look at Client Go, API, and API machinery, and what our development workflows would be like if the authoritative source moved out of tree rather than being in tree. And if we can solve for those cases, I'm hoping that gets us 90% of the way there.
Yeah, I think stuff sort of happened with staging stuff stopped happening with staging because it wasn't a blocker to anyone anymore, and therefore nobody was motivated to improve it.
It reached good enough stage.
Yeah, it got to like, okay, we can live with this.
Okay, so the action item is that you will follow up with them and take a look at that PR.
Sure.
I'll try to also take a look at it.
But I just want to say I like Matt's suggestion that focusing on clients is valuable.
Yep.
I think at the end of the day, it starts and ends with Client Go, really. I mean, like if we can figure out how to actually make that work across all the things that are using it with a stable API, then we're golden.
Yeah, and the upstreams of that, so API machinery and API.
What's that, I'm sorry?
And the upstreams of that, which are API machinery and API.
I mean, that's the nut of it, right? We want to have it both ways where we get to like refactor things willy-nilly, but then we also have shared code and it's...
Yeah, on that in particular, Go client needs to be split into two different libraries. One which has all the generic stuff like the dynamic client, the REST client, the generic conformers, and the other one, and that one doesn't need to depend on the Kubernetes API.
Yeah, because it doesn't have generated types.
Because it doesn't have any generated types in it. The other one that consists of all the generated stuff. And, yeah, that one would depend on the API. But I think that we have to make that split because we want people who are providing their own APIs to be able to follow the Client Go model to offer people clients. And right now, Client Go is a mix of things that are per API and things that are universal for any Kubernetes style API. So,
but that's on the API machinery roadmap, presumably, or sort of.
In theory, yeah, we've had a design doc on this approved for a long time and haven't found somebody to do it yet.
General client works lightly staffed right now, I would say, right?
Yeah, I think we're focusing more on like CRDs and server side things, I would say.
Okay, so we're about out of time for this topic, maybe. Although, Dims, did we adequately cover the Cinder OpenStack issue for now?
Yeah, I'll talk to Lavalamp, but in general, it's not just Cinder. It's the entire external cloud product stuff is hinged on the fact that we have to support the in-tree volumes, and we need a good solution for that. And this might help there, but worst case, we have to staff that other proposal that Saad has mentioned here. So I want to make sure that people actually look at that alternate proposal too.
So
if you look at the last link in my item, one way out seems to be the CSI migration.md.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So Daniel, you, me, and probably Andrew's Sycam, we can talk later.
Sure.
You can also loop me in too, Dims. This is Tim, since I'm guilty of a lot of the volumes crimes.
Thanks, Tim. Sounds good.
If you want to add me too, we've had a fair amount of experience with the staging stuff, so I'm happy to chip in if it's helpful.
Perfect, Jordan. Thank you.
It looks like we have hit the things on the agenda. There is a placeholder in the agenda about checking this on the mailing list. So hopefully the owner of that item will do that, and we can.
Oh, yeah. So For the folks who are present, like I see Justin on, is punting those to the mailing list okay with you?
Yes, it was basically a process question, so I will put it on the mailing list.
Thank you.
That's great. Well, some mystical way, we've actually given ourselves some extra time today. I don't know how that happened, but boy, am I proud of us.
This is what happens when
Jace, I do want to talk about the logging stuff.
Oh, no.
Yes.
All right, Dims. Fine.
Tim, just do it. Fix it. I don't care how.
I'm ready, and I need Tim to sign off, and then we are done. No, not really. So the first problem here is that there are problems in the glog itself that needs to be fixed. So that the simple example was from Tim Allclair, where he wanted everything to go into a single file, and we don't have that support. So we have to fix glog. So to do that, we have to extract glog into third-party directory, fix some of our shell scripts to be able to support pulling the code in from there. So the good news there is glog has never had an update for a really long time, so we are not going to have a problem trying to sync things into third party anyway, because it stopped completely. So that's the second part. Then the third part is people want to use, so we can't have two separate logging systems active at the same time, even if it is like two instances of glog living in different packages, because we won't be able to reconcile the logs, because some logs will go here, some logs will go there. So what we need is a way to plug in a writer into glog so it can write to wherever you want. So we want to separate the things that use like the log package, the glog, or the logrs from, not logrs, sorry, log R from Tim. So those are the things that people use for writing their code. And then we want to make sure that the output from either one of those three go to the same spot. So that's why I structured it in such a way that the glog has a set output, which takes in a writer, and the writer essentially writes to wherever we need to write to. So for example, in Justin's case, he can use that a writer that sends that to tracing. And then if you want to leave it to glog, we can leave it to glog. If you want to write to standard error or syslog, we can leave that as it is. So I want to separate the top from the bottom, and the bottom can be replaceable, command line options or whatever. But the whole idea was we should be able to layer the newer API that Tim wants on top of glog, and essentially make sure the people who are writing new libraries, or even we can do a good first issues, get people started on making changes to the KK repository to use the new logging API. So that's the end goal. So so basically, I have a experimental whip there. It seems to do all the things that I wanted to do, but I need to break it up into things that we really want to do, which is what, for example, Tim has to make up his mind. What do we want to do, Tim and Justin?
Okay. I'll take the blame for a lot of things, but actually, I guess I have to take the blame for glog. I think I actually did write that integration. I think if I can summarize, the problem is there's three problems. Glog has some bugs or shortcomings that cause us pain. Mm-hmm. Glog is a crappy API for logs, and glog is a crappy implementation for logs.
Yep.
And we can attack those three problems independently. And we got two separate PRs open, one of which attacks the glog has some shortcomings. We can work around those. That's Tim Allclair's. We have yours, which is glog is a crappy implementation of logging and has bugs, which tackles two of the three. And we have the other proposal that sort of Justin and Sally and I had tossed around about attacking it from the API point of view. And I don't think doing nothing is a really great answer at this point. The question is, which something do we want to do?
Does any of your thing, Tim, does any of your questions involve the fact that there's like command line flags defined globally as part of glog?
Glog has shortcomings and bugs that we would like to work around. DIMS, like to be really clear, DIMS PR, I looked at it in fair detail this morning. It's not horrible. It takes the glog library, which is not that big of a library, forks it into third party, does some baloney in our shell scripts to make it be findable as Golang glog, and adds a couple of features which basically override all the other glog features. So if you use these features, which we would, then you're entering a simpler path in the glog library. The patch is pretty surgical. It doesn't do really deep changes. It's really around the flags and which file you're opening, and that's sort of it.
Doesn't that make things really awkward for things that are published from staging? Like, because they're going to import the regular glog package when they're consumed by...
It does.
So that doesn't seem great.
It doesn't seem great, but we can maybe don't not care.
So hang on. So I fixed that too, Daniel. The thing, what I did there was, if you look at the PR, the vendor directory has a symlink to the third-party directory. So it uses the patched version of glog.
That helps for our binaries. It doesn't help for rando third-party.
Oh, you're saying that also gets published in the vendor directory for the things that we publish?
Yes.
I don't count on that. Eric's got his hand up.
I think
Justin had his hand up first.
And Matt also.
Technically it was Eric first, but I think it is important that I say, like, I actually want to go much further. I want to integrate it with spans in the sort of tracing sense of the word. The sort of rationale being, eventually we're going to want to do something like open tracing, open census anyway. That requires putting all these spans through, putting context information in there. To do both would be very, like, to duplicate the logging information and the tracing information on that assumption, it would be bad. So if we're going to do it, we should do both.
So Wojtek, Merrick, and myself did an experiment with tracing. It does not work in a watch style event architecture such as ours. In fact, it fails gloriously. We plumbed it through APIs. Wojtek and I know the gore details. We've done a lot of work on it, and we just ended up failing. If you could find a different method that allows you to span a watch, and I'm game, I'm all ears, but that capability is not a requirement.
I appreciate the invitation.
Eric, you had your hand up, and then Matt.
Why would we put stuff in third party instead of creating a new repo like Kubernetes/glog?
Right. Excellent question. The reason is that C-Advisor currently uses glog, right? So there are a couple of more references to glog within our vendors. So what we need to do is we need to do the third party here first, make sure that all our scenarios are working fine, then allow the third party glog to be used by whoever needs it. At that point, we can choose to move it into a separate repository too. Right now, the main concern is making sure that there is one copy of glog that is being used both for the vendor code as well as the code in the KK repository. That's the main reason.
Didn't make sense to me, but okay.
So please play with the PR, and I can walk you through it.
Okay, Matt.
I was going to say, if you're still using something like Godap, because modules aren't GA, it does flattening. And I haven't looked at Go modules, but I would expect it not to do everybody's all dynamic vendors. I haven't looked at the exact details of what a symlink is going to do, but I have a feeling it's going to cause issues and not really work for the outside consumers. So I would hope we can come up with a better long-term strategy for this. Would it be possible to do something like actually have it in an external repo, even if it's synced what we're doing, so that way others could start to use it, and maybe we create our own library, but make it API compatible for glog and route that through if you're still doing that, and then ask others to start using that where we need it?
Matt, the problem with that is there are two references to glogs, one from the main glog and one from ours. The flags are going to clash, number one. And then both of them are going to create a new directory for each one of those packages because they are package level constructs. The init is package level. So both of them are going to create a new directory for putting their own logs. So you will have essentially 2 sets of logs, depending on whether the logging is using the library that we have created new or the ones that are coming from the main glog. So, and that doesn't work.
Okay, Tim Moncler.
Hey, I just wanted to clarify that I think we're all on the same page with where we want this to eventually end up. Not the specific implementation details, but we want to solve the 3 problems that Tim Hawken listed. And so I think what we're kind of debating here is just what order do we want to tackle those in, and like what is the best way to get there. So I don't think anyone's arguing that like forking the log is the desired end state.
I also don't think that
it is actually.
I don't think it's the desired end state, because I think in the end, glog's a crappy log library to start with. So we can replace glog with a better logging library if we can insulate our users from the fact that it's using glog, which today has propagated out into things like cAdvisor and has propagated out into clients via client Go.
I mean, to play devil's advocate along with Eric, like why not go ahead and fork glog and fix the things that cause it to be incompatible with other copies of glog? If we fork it, we can control that.
Daniel,
so we're about out of time. Do we want to continue this discussion on the mailing list?
I just want to say one thing before we wrap up. That doesn't work. Just forking doesn't work, because we'll have 2 copies of glog, one from the main glog and one is ours. And if both cannot coincide,
I'm claiming to
be in the same this thing. So the thing is, yes, we have an end goal. What we should say is we need an end goal where we have an external fork of glog for sure. But then how do we get there? And I'm proposing the first step is what I have in the PR.
And honestly, Dims, after reading your PR this morning, I'm inclined to go with it because you've done a lot of the homework. But I would like to make sure that everybody here understands why we would go with that and is okay with that.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
Okay.
All right. Now we're really done. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Sorry about that, everyone. Bye.
Bye.